Hello everyone, welcome to lesson 8 in math. It's Introduction to Fractions. This unit kind of thing will be separated into a couple of lessons. Today we're just doing Introduction to Fractions where we're going to learn the basics, reduce fractions, and also convert to or from fractions. So let's get started and stay tuned for the future videos in fractions where we learn to add, subtract, and multiply and divide. Part 1 is the basics of fractions. So just a couple of definitions. A fraction is a part of a whole. It consists of a numerator and a denominator. And an example could be like you eat 2/3 of a pizza. So in this case, the 2 is the numerator and the 3 is the denominator. And we're going to talk about what the numerator and the denominator is in just a bit. Improper fraction is when the numerator is more than the denominator. So for example, 5/4. So as we can see, the top number or the numerator is 5 and 5 is greater than 4, which is the denominator. So therefore that is an improper fraction. Next is mixed number, and that's a type of fraction that consists of a whole number and a fraction. So in the example 1 and 1/5, the first one is a whole number, and the fraction part is 1/5, where 1 is the numerator and 5 is the denominator. And now numerator, like I said, we're going to talk about it a little bit more. So here the numerator is a number above the line in a fraction, and it basically shows the number of parts in a whole that are being counted. So if we go back to the pizza example at the top, where it says you eat 2/3 of a pizza, the 2 is the numerator because it tells us how many parts of the pizza has been counted, in this case 18. The denominator is the number below the line in a fraction, and it shows the total number of parts in a whole. So with the pizza fraction example, the 3 is the denominator because it shows us the total number of slices. Equivalent fractions are fractions with different numbers but the same values. So for example, 6/10 is equal to 3/5. And later on in this video, we're going to be talking about reducing fractions, like I mentioned up here. So we will learn how to get from, for example, 6/10 to 3/5. We can also convert mixed numbers to improper fractions. So we just talked about what mixed numbers are, and we talked about what improper fractions are. So there are two methods to do this, and I'm going to go over both of them. And it really doesn't matter which method you use. Sometimes one could be easier than the other. It depends on what kind of fraction or how big of a fraction we are working with. But you can choose whichever one you want, and it's going to give you the exact same answer. So with method 1, there are 2 steps where the first one you have to change the whole number into a fraction. So for example, with 1 and 1/5, the whole number is 1. So we're going to have to change 1 into a fraction as well. And how do we do that? Well, first of all, it's most easy when you look at your the fraction part of the whole number or of the mixed number, and you see, okay, so the denominator is 5. So if we make the denominator of this 5 as well, then it's going to help us with the next step. So in this case, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make 1 change into a denominator of 5. And in order for this 1 to equal the whole number for it to equal a fraction, I'm going to have to make the numerator the exact same thing as the denominator so that they can divide and eventually equal 1. So if you take a look at 5/5 here, it can also look like a division. So when we're taking 5, the numerator, dividing it by the denominator 5, we get 1. So therefore, this is equal. So we just did step 1, we changed the whole number 1 into a fraction, which is 5/5. And now we're going to add the 2 fractions together. So we're going to add 5/5, or 5/5, with 1/5. And if the denominators are not the same, then we're going to find the greatest common denominator. But in this case, and the greatest common denominator is a number that both denominators can, I like to call, agree upon, or basically become equal with. But in this case, we have the 2 denominators are the same. They're both 5, so now we can add them. And that's why in the next video with fractions, we're going to be talking more about greatest common denominators and adding and subtracting fractions. So for now, if it confuses you a lot, you don't have to worry about this. Again, this is just the basic things we're doing here. But with this example, I have 5 over 5 plus 1 over 5. And when we're adding and subtracting fractions, we never add or subtract the denominators. We only do it to the numerators. So 5 plus 1 is 6. And we don't add 5 plus 5 as the denominators. Because the denominators always have to be the same thing. If we add them, we're going to basically come up with a whole new fraction, and it's not going to be the same value, right? Like whatever is on this side of the equal sign has to be the same as the other side. Again, we're going to be talking about this more in depth in the next video, and that's why I don't want to really give lots of detail here because I don't want to confuse you. Again, this is just the basic stuff here. But 5 plus 1 is 6, and we don't add the denominators, so the final answer we get is 6/5. So therefore, 1 and 1/5 is equal to 6/5 in terms of an improper fraction. The second method is also 2 steps. It's just a little different that we first multiply the denominator by the whole number, and then we add the product and the numerator together to get our final answer. So if we take a look at this same example, and that's why I chose the same examples or same numbers, so that you can see that you do get the same final answer. So 1 and 1/5. So according to our steps here, we have to first multiply the denominator by the whole number. So the denominator is 5. We're going to multiply that by 1. So 5 times 1 is 5. And now with the product, again, product is the name given to a multiplication answer. So in this case, the 5 is a product because we did 5 times 1, which is equal to 5. So 5 is a product, and we're going to add that with the numerator, and that's 5 plus 1, which is 6. And so with that being said, 6 is going to be our numerator, and the denominator is always going to be the same. So if it was 5 over here, it's going to be 5 over here. So that's that. But those are the 2 steps you use to convert mixed numbers to improper fractions. The next thing is also that we can convert improper fractions to mixed numbers. So let's take a closer look at this. There are 2 steps involved. Step 1 is to divide the numerator by the denominator to see how many times the denominator goes into the numerator. And then step 2 is the quotient. And again, quotient is the answer of a division problem. The quotient becomes a whole number, and the remainder becomes a new numerator. So it's kind of wordy here, but if we do this example, hopefully you can better understand what the steps are telling us. So the example I'm working with over here is 5/4. And according to step 1, I'm going to have to divide the numerator, which is 5, by 4. So 5 divided by 4, and I'm doing the long division method here. Of course, you can go ahead and do this on a calculator, but we want to show our work. So 5 divided by 4. So how many times does 4 go into 5? Well, it goes once. So I'm going to write 1 at the top, and then 1 times 4. Again, this is basic long division. So right, it's divide, multiply, subtract, bring down, right? DMSB. So we did, we found out that 4 goes into 5 once. 4 times 1 is 4, and now we're subtracting. So 5 minus 4 is 1. So in this case, we're going to stop, and the quotient, which is 1, becomes a whole number, and the remainder is a new numerator. And the remainder, coincidentally, is also 1. But basically, we're going to have 1 go as a numerator, and then the denominator, like I said in the last part, the denominator is always going to be 4. So if it's 4 over here, it's going to be 4 here. So it's always going to be identical. So therefore, 5/4 is equal to 1 1/4. Part 2, reducing fractions. So when we're reducing fractions, we're working with the greatest common factor to find the greatest common denominator. We talked about factors in lesson 6, so if you're confused about that, you don't know what it is, or you just need even a refresher, you can go back to that lesson, and I will put a little link at the top of the screen here. But if we're looking at this example here with 6/10, we're asking ourselves the question, which number is divisible by both 6 and 10? And that's when we lay out all of these numbers that are multiples of 6 or factors. So for 6, it's 1 times 6, 2 times 3, and that's pretty much it for 6. For 10, it's 1 times 10, 2 times 5. And there are no more numbers. If we look at these two sets, we can see that 2 repeats for 6 and 10. So that means that 2 is a number that is divisible by both 6 and 10. So that's what we're going to reduce the fraction with. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. And you know that the fraction has been fully reduced when you can't reduce anymore. So if we look at our fraction, our new fraction here, which is 3/5, and we ask the question again, which number is divisible by both 3 and 5, the answer is nothing. If we, honestly, for 3, it's a prime number. It's only divisible by 1 in itself. And same thing with 5. It's only divisible by 1 in itself. There are no other numbers that when multiplied give us 5 or 3. So therefore, there is nothing, and we know that our fraction has been fully reduced. So therefore, 6/10 is equal to 3/5. And here are some practice questions for you. You can reduce these and show your work, just like I did. Don't just do it on, a calculator or whatever. Again, this is for practice. If you need it, it's here for you. You're more than welcome to do it. And just one final thing, when reducing large fractions and you don't know the greatest common factor, increase your steps by reducing with smaller factors, so like 2. So say we have something like 20 over 164, and you know your factors and multiples for 20, but with 164 you don't really know it. That's fine. What you could do is increase your steps, like I said, and keep on reducing by a number that is divisible by both 20 and 164. And in this case, because they are even numbers, we can do it with 2. Again, you should go back and check lesson 6 to see which numbers are divisible by which numbers. So I did a whole page on divisibility. So if you need help with that, you can definitely check that video. Again, lesson 6. But 20 over 164, they're both even numbers, so we could reduce by 2. When we reduce 20 by 2, we get 10. And when we reduce 164 by 2, we get 82. And I look at 10 and 82, and they're still able to become smaller fractions. 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 82 divided by 2 is 41. I look at 5 and 41, and you can't reduce them anymore. They're the final answers, mainly because they're prime numbers. And, there's no number that will divide into 5 and 41. So therefore, 20 over 164 is equal to 5 over 41. Part 3 is converting fractions. So here with converting fractions, we have 4 kind of examples. We're going to start off with fraction to a decimal. And I have some practice questions here as well. I did some examples, and you would have the opportunity to also practice if you wish to do so, and the answers will be in the description box. But fraction to a decimal, you have to take the numerator divided by the denominator. So say you have 7/8. I'm going to take 7 divided by 8, and I will get 0.87 or 87 hundredths. 6/10 is equal to 6/10. And 4/5, I'm going to give you the opportunity to find what the decimal would be. Next is fraction to percent, and in order to do that conversion, we have to take the numerator divided by the denominator and multiply by 100. So say we have 11 over 20. 11 divided by 20 is going to be 55 hundredths. And once I multiply by 100, or I take the decimal point and I move it 2 times to the right, I'm going to get 55%. 3/4 or 3/4 is 3 divided by 4 according to our rule, and then I would get 75 hundredths, and then I would multiply that by 100 to get 75%, or basically I would just move the decimal point 2 times to the right because there are 2 zeros. Decimal to fraction is multiply by its place value, make the denominator that place value, and reduce. So again, that's a little wordy, but we're going to do it step by step with 2 examples, and then you would better see what this rule is telling us to do. So say we have 22 hundredths. We're going to multiply it by its place value. A place value here is hundredths. Again, there are 2 digits after the decimal point. That's going to be the hundredths place value, which we talked about in our last lesson. So 22 hundredths times 100, and we get 22 over 100. Okay, so we're going to make the denominator, like I said, by that place value. And again, going back to the last part, we do reduce as much as possible. 22 over 100, they are both even numbers. They should be divisible by 2. 22 divided by 2 is 11, and 100 divided by 2 is 50. So our final answer is 11 over 50 because we can't divide those further by a number that divides into both. And the next example is 67 thousandths. And we're going to multiply that by 1,000 because that's the place value, and the denominator is going to be 1,000. And once we move the decimal point 3 times to the right, because there are 3 zeros in 1,000, we're going to get 67. And that's going to be our final answer. Percent of fractions, you have to put 100 as a denominator and reduce. So say we have 9%, 9 over 100, and we can't reduce anymore, so that will be our final answer. 125%. So 125 over 100. In this case, we are able to reduce because both of them are divisible by 25. Again, if you don't know that they're both divisible by 25, you can just start little and divide both of them by 5 because 2 can't go into 125. So you could do 5. And then keep on going until you get to 5/4. And then this is an improper fraction. If you want to go a step ahead and convert this to a mixed number, you can do that as well. And you will get 1 1/4. So that's actually pretty much it for our lesson, but I have included 2 extra things. It's not really related to fractions though. I just put it there in case you want to know how to convert a decimal to a percent or a percent to a decimal. A decimal to a percent, you simply multiply by 100. So, for example, if you have 4 hundredths, you're going to multiply by 100 to get 4%. If you have, for example, 45 thousandths, you're still going to multiply by 100. And we're going to talk about why 100 in just a bit. So we're moving the decimal point 2 times to the right because there are 2 zeros and 100, and we're going to get 4.5%. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to do 2 56 hundredths and convert that into a percent. If we're doing a percent to a decimal, we're going to divide by 100. So for example, say we have 97%, we're going to divide by 100, remove the decimal point, which would basically be after the 7 here. We're going to move that 2 times to the left, and it's going to become 0.97 or 97 hundredths. Say if we have 9%, we're going to still divide by 100, and that's going to be 9 hundredths. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to do 125% into a decimal, and again, the answer would be in the description box. And like I said earlier when we were on question 5, the reason we do it by 100 is because the word percent means per 100. Per and cent. Cent is basically 100. In French, decimal to a percent, we're multiplying by 100. And when we're doing a percent to a decimal, we're dividing by 100. So basically, with that being said, that's the end of our lesson for Introduction to Fractions. And we're going to be having a couple more videos on fractions, and it's going to get a little more challenging. Not to say that to scare you, but it's just that we're going to do more adding, subtracting, and working with operations. So thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully everything made sense. Again, the answers to any practice questions that you were able to do, meaning I gave you the opportunity to do, would be in the description box. And again, thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.